after the Trump administration apparently defied a court order halting deportation flights over the weekend, Trump border czar Tom Homan said, "I don't care what the judges think." What word comes to mind when you hear that statement?
Due process. Constitutional
That's two words,
crisis.
but we'll take it.
I mean, this story is about immigration, but it's also a story about the rule of law, due process, checks and balances, and how our democracy functions.
I was going to go with bone-chilling, but I realize, Eduardo, that too is two words, so I'll go with authoritarian.
Yeah, what it tells me is that we have something that looks like an elected monarchy. This represents a profound attack on that which we hold dear, the American values that make this country great.
This is Impromptu from Washington Post Opinions, a show that brings you conversations about the news we can't stop thinking about, no matter how hard we try. I'm Dana Milbank, a columnist here at The Post, and this week we're talking about the Trump administration's crackdown on immigrants, even those that are in this country legally. The government is trying to deport Mahmoud Khalil, a legal resident and graduate student at Columbia University, who was involved with the campus protests over the Israel-Gaza war last spring. But that isn't an isolated case. ICE has detained other people in the U.S. with legal status in recent weeks, too. A Brown University doctor was removed despite a court order requiring that the judge be given notice in advance, and the administration apparently ignored a court order temporarily halting deportation flights of alleged Venezuelan gang members until it could be determined that they had been given due process. Toughening enforcement at the border is one thing, but Trump, by denying due process and removing people who've gone through the often arduous process of getting into the U.S. legally, has taken things to a whole new level. What does all this mean for free speech, freedom of movement, and the future of our legal immigration system? I'm joined by two of my colleagues to talk it through.
I'm Eduardo Porter, a member of the editorial board and a columnist. I write about a variety of things, including immigration.
Hi, I'm Shadi Hamid. I'm a columnist here at The Post.
All right, let's start by talking about Khalil, the Columbia student. The only justification given for trying to deport him is that Secretary of State Marco Rubio determined his presence in the U.S. has potentially serious adverse foreign policy consequences. What do you guys make of this?
Yeah, so look at the justification here. Anyone who presents a risk to American foreign policy or presents adverse foreign policy consequences can be removed unilaterally. That's incredibly vague, and that could apply to potentially millions of people who are here legally. Who decides? And what the Trump administration is saying, it decides what constitutes that, without any kind of input from Congress or anyone else. And that's what's so frightening. And I think really the case of Mahmoud Khalil will be remembered as a hinge moment in the Trump administration, when things really took a turn for the worse, when things really got chilling and quite dark. What did Khalil actually do? Because no one has alleged that he committed an actual crime. There's no assertion of criminal activity here. What DHS Deputy Secretary said is that he was engaging in pro-Palestinian activity and he was in the middle of protests. So again, here we're going in the direction of criminalizing protest activity. Again, these are things that are so central to who we are as Americans: freedom of speech, the right to assembly, the right to protest our government. Let's say hypothetically that Trump went even further and said anyone who takes part in anti-Trump or anti-Elon Musk protests is also acting in a way that is antithetical to U.S. interests.
Hasn't, in fact, some of that you just mentioned already happened? Did not Trump say that attacks on Tesla lots would be considered an act of terrorism? It seems like they're not even trying to make a reasonable case that might pass muster in court. It's they're, saying whatever comes to mind in the moment as a justification for their actions, which to me suggests that maybe that is part of the plan. It's not to make a justifiable legal claim. It's not to make something that can be defensible in court, but it's something that which will therefore allow them to, well, assert executive power in some way over the courts and weaken that balance of power. I mean, it seems to me that the ultimate goal, more than about migration, even though migration is one of Trump's main topics, it's more about defying the judiciary and imposing the will of the executive.
You know, sometimes we say the cruelty is the point with the Trump administration. I think now we're entering a new stage where the domination is the point. It's about asserting control in a very gratuitous way. It seems so over the top. So a lot of us are thinking, like, what is really going on here? But I think we have to understand that they're trying to show their dominance and that they can get away with whatever they want. It's a way to kind of push people into submission and the courts into submission. That's what they're trying to do.
Yeah. Well, Marco Rubio says this isn't about free speech. So, of course, I'm going to take that at face value. I suppose it's not only about free speech in the sense that it's also about ignoring due process. But I don't, what do you think? Is this going to result in a real chilling effect on all speech, on all protest?
One immediate thought is, well, what happens if the administration does defy the courts? If they're, if they decide to ignore what?
Well, they already sort of have, Eduardo, right?
Yeah, but they're claiming they're not. At least they're sort of like the body movement is no, we're going by the rules. We haven't yet reached that moment where they say, okay, court, enforce it. As that old trope goes, enforce your decision because we're not going to obey. I hope this does not chill free speech, and I hope that, people still have faith in the courts, but it will really depend on whether the administration decides to abide by what the judge's decision is.
At the same time, the Trump administration is inventing these dubious new ways to deport people quickly, including an attempt over the weekend to invoke the Alien Enemies Act, a 1798 law that has only been used in wartime, most recently when it was justifying Japanese internment during World War II. Why is he doing it this way? Is it, on the one hand, symbolic, to whip up his supporters, even if he's expecting it to be blocked in court? Or is he actually hoping and expecting that the Supreme Court will uphold his ignoring of due process and this incredible expansion of executive power?
I think there's a danger here of trying to interpret Trump and come up with some rational, coherent view of what exactly he's doing. We know he's very instinctual and impulsive. I think what they're doing here is trying to find even a shred of legal justification, even if they have to use statutes that haven't been used for decades and used very rarely when they have been. And I think Trump doesn't care about the justification, and it's probably his legal counsel, which is trying to take what Trump thinks and wants and convert it into something that could potentially be plausible. But it is really about pushing the limits as far as they can go. I think this is very central to how Trump does politics. He'll come up with an endless barrage of crazy, aggressive, gratuitous things, and he'll see what sticks and what doesn't. And he's almost like prompting us, what will you guys do? What do you guys got? Like, come back if you can. And we'll have to see how everyone else responds.
I agree with you there, Shadi, but I do kind of identify a coherent theme. I mean, I find it risky to use the word coherence when speaking about the Trump administration, but there is a theme that's been around since the campaign and that has been deployed in various areas of policy, which is this idea of the nation under threat, of an emergency. An emergency justifies everything. And you can see the legal reasoning behind that, right? I mean, there are specific powers that the executive can deploy if he declares an emergency, but it's been used in the trade domain as well. So the tariffs against Mexico and Canada were initially imposed under some argument of a national emergency. And he's invoking the, national security powers to deport the Venezuelans, to do everything that he's doing on the migration front as well. So I'm not sure whether he truly believes that the nation is under threat, but it certainly has been a theme of his for a long, long time.
Yeah, and Eduardo, I'm glad you brought up tariffs, because I think what we have here are the two things that Trump does seem to believe in. He seems quite ideologically flexible on most things, but he has two obsessions. One is on tariffs. He's called tariffs one of his favorite words in the English language,
Right.
and anti-immigration and controlling who comes in through the border. These are Trump's guiding lights. So I think that's where we can see some coherence, and those are the things that are going to be the animating themes of his administration going forward.
Yeah, I'm inclined to agree that whenever we sort of look to say, hey, what's the strategy here? We may come up empty because it just may be chaos, but there's clearly elements of both in this case. Some of it is clearly designed for public opinion, knowing that he's going to lose in court. But some of it, I think, is also saying, hey, maybe we've got a friendly court that's just, going to rewrite or unilaterally repeal the 14th Amendment and maybe the Fifth Amendment while we're at it. All right, I want to talk more about the bigger picture of what all these actions mean for our legal immigration system and what effect it might have on our country in the long run. But first, we have to take a quick break. Welcome back. I'm Dana Milbank, and this is Impromptu. Some universities have advised international students and faculty to avoid non-essential travel out of the country right now because of the possibility that there could be a new travel ban. Are you guys concerned about people who aren't citizens being able to freely leave and enter the United States? And what advice are you giving them, if so?
Yeah, so actually I was just talking to a green card holder friend of mine the other day, and it's the first time I've really heard him tell me this, but he's wondering now if there's certain things that he shouldn't say. And I could tell that he was frightened in a way that I hadn't seen before. So this really applies to millions of green card holders who now have to wonder, how far can I go? Should I just stay silent? If I have political beliefs, should I hide them? And that's a very un-American thing for future American citizens to be thinking. They should be able to express themselves without fear of persecution if they are here in the country. So this is going to have, and is already having, a chilling effect in ways that are very tangible. And likely future American citizens will be living in fear, or at least some fear.
Mm-hmm.
For sure. And there's the issue of speech and what you're allowed to say and what can get you deported. But there's also this additional fear of the arbitrariness of it all. It seems like suddenly protections that you believed were, as a matter of course, are no longer there. Regular visa holders like this doctor from Brown, suddenly at the airport they can meet an agent that decides that no, you going to Nasrallah's funeral makes you an enemy of this country, and hence you're going to be deported within the next 24 hours. I just a few days ago received a visitor, and she was just on a tourist visa, and I was there standing there at the airport waiting for her to come out and thinking, what happens if the guy that she runs into is just kind of like having a bad day and decides that he doesn't like her and turns her around? And that's a question that I'd never had before, but now it seems common. There was this case of the young woman at trying to come in through the San Isidro crossing from Mexico into California, who was just detained for weeks because she was carrying some tattooing equipment. But this was just like a tourist. This didn't even rise to an issue of speech or any other politically salient issue. It was just, hey, we're going to detain you because our attitude towards foreigners. Suddenly we are allowed to treat foreigners in a way that we didn't used to.
Right.
And there's also the case of the German green card holder, which is perhaps the most mysterious out of all these incidents, where he was coming back into the country and he ran into officers who interrogated him, and then he was actually stripped naked and forced to take a cold shower. And we still don't know what happened there. There's some speculation that he had a prior drug offense, but we don't really know. And that goes back to this point of arbitrariness.
Yes.
We don't know how these decisions are being made, who they're being made by, and that creates a culture of fear when we don't know where the red lines are and we don't know who's coming up with the red lines.
Exactly. And this is what happens when you dismantle the rule of law. Then every decision becomes arbitrary and up to whatever individual is out there enforcing it. And, that's the most alarming thing, because ultimately that affects not, those of us who are citizens. I mean, where does the line get drawn once you've dismantled the rule of law?
Yeah, I mean, when do they start going after citizens in some way? I mean, that's the really frightening thing here, that you set a precedent with visa holders, then green card holders, and then is the next step to actually challenge the rights of American citizens? That's yet to be determined.
Sure. But if we've lost due process, there's no reason for them not to. All right. Well, the U.S. has a complex and demanding legal immigration system. It includes asylum claims and visas for students and people with extraordinary skills. By targeting these immigrants who've gone through all that, does this degrade that legal immigration system for now and the future, do you think?
Well, on the asylum and refugee end of things, it certainly does. I mean, I believe that the right to asylum is being challenged. And to be fair, not only in the United States, but in other rich countries as well. But it seems to me that the Trump administration would like to do away with it altogether. And you can see him now in making people that are under the TPS system, temporary protected status system. He wants to put an end to that. He wants to put an end to this temporary parole that the Biden administration had used to allow people from certain countries in for a limited period of time. So those are, legal pathways that the administration is making illegal. Closing legal doors. On the other end, on the end that's more important to employers, which would be, the H-1B visas for tech workers and so forth, I think there is a constituency close to Trump by the name of Elon Musk that's very supportive of this particular form of legal migration. And so I think it's going to be more solid. It'll be more difficult to dismantle. We've already had a little bit of a battle within the administration with the Steve Bannon side versus the Musk side over H-1B visas.
I do worry about if the events of the last couple of weeks, particularly the Khalil case, will send a message that for folks who are considering studying in the U.S. or applying for a job here, if they're going to be dissuaded. America has attracted the best talent for generations. This is part of what makes America great. And I worry now that less people are going to be enthusiastic about coming to this country because of the uncertainty around even the legal immigration system. And that could really hurt America in any number of ways in terms of having people with special skills that we need, people with exceptional talents. That pipeline is going to be affected by this.
Yeah, and that's exactly what I wanted to get at as we close this out here, and that is the really big picture and, saying we're deterring those seeking asylum, those coming as students, those coming on H-1B visas. What is that? I mean, we know what that means for the migrants who are not coming. Let's talk about what that means for the United States, as Shadi started to do there. What are the long-term consequences? What does our country look like if Trump is succeeding in putting a near end to legal immigration, except perhaps for white South Africans?
Well, it certainly stunts our economy. But that is of a piece that is coherent with a bunch of other things that the Trump administration is doing. I mean, I think that you could broadly say that the American economic success has rested to a substantial degree on attracting, on the one hand, foreign capital, and on the other hand, foreign brains, very skilled foreign workers. And the Trump administration is basically working to undermine both of these dynamics. Its economic policy, based on, tariffs on everything from everywhere, is certainly going to damage the flow of investment into the United States and, the economic efficiency of the United States. And then I agree with Shadi that there will be a deterrent effect on the people who would used to come here to carry out their careers and invest in new startups. So yes, it's ultimately another instance of the Trump administration shooting the United States in the foot.
I mean, it could also mean that America's population shrinks sooner than expected. I mean, for the first time in American history, we've always been a country that's been constantly moving and growing. But because the birth rate is now below replacement level, it means that we rely on immigration for our population to stay stable and to increase. And that could change if the Trump administration takes a certain approach. At the same time, I do believe that America is resilient and that if Democrats are able to bounce back and rebuild their party, Democrats could win in 2028 or at least 2032. Oof. Now, that gives Trump and his successors a lot of time to do damage to the country, but it's worth remembering that these policies can be reversed. We still do live in a democracy, however flawed, and that means that American citizens, we can fight back and express our displeasure and oppose this government, and that pushback can be realized in policies if people vote for a different party.
I mean, if you want to go really, really, really big picture, another 4 years of this in a dynamic world, I'm not sure you can come back or how you can come back, because also you assume, okay, the U.S. decides it's going to isolate itself from the world. It's going to cut off its allies. It's going to cut itself off from migration and trade and so on. Well, I guess there is a point in where the rest of the world says, well, okay, and tries to move on without what was the center of the institutional architecture and build something different. Yeah. I would see a much poorer U.S., much less influential U.S., in a much less stable world if this were to happen. But maybe my hair's on fire.
Well, your hair looks fine to me, Eduardo, and you both seem to have significantly more of it than I do. But I like Shadi's outlook that, it can change, and ultimately it's going to be up to the American voters to get angry and do something about it. But there's going to be a whole lot of damage done in the short term. And with that, we've got to wrap this up, and I'd like to thank you both for joining this episode of Impromptu.
Thanks, Dana.
Thank you.
This episode was produced by Hadley Robinson and Regina DeHeer, edited by Damir Marusic, Chris Solentrop, and Allison Michaels, and mixed by Emma Munger. Special thanks to Millie Mitra and Deirdre Byrne. Thanks for listening to Impromptu. Please let us know what you think about what's happening with immigration policy. Send an email to impromptu@washpost.com. And remember to tune in to the Friday edition of Impromptu, where you can hear my colleagues Drew Goins and Molly Roberts talk about topics other than politics.